What does postmodern mean in literature?
No. It's after modernism.
Okay.
What it means. It's a very useful catch-all term because you say it and we all nod soberly as if we know what we're talking about. And in fact, we don't. There are certain, when I mean postmodern, I'm talking about maybe the black humorists who came along in the 1960s, the post-Nabokovians. I'm talking about Pynchon and Barthélemy and Barth, DeLillo in the early 70s, Coover, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a lot. Let me see.
But that's the camp you put yourself in.
I think
without comparison,
that's the camp that interested me when I was a student. The problem is I think postmodernism has to a large extent run its course. The biggest thing for me that was interesting about postmodernism is that it was the first text that was highly self-conscious. Self-conscious of itself as text, self-conscious of the writer as persona, self-conscious about the effects that narrative had on readers and the fact that the readers probably knew that. It was the first generation of writers who'd actually read a lot of criticism, and there was a certain schizophrenia about it. It was very useful, it seems to me, because the culture, this was a real beaker of acid in the face of the culture. The culture at the time this came out, this was before, the youth rebellion in the 60s, was very staid and very conservative and very Alfred Kazanish. And the problem, though, is that a lot of the shticks of postmodernism, irony, cynicism, irreverence, are now part of whatever it is that's enervating in the culture itself, right? Burger King now sells hamburgers with "you got to break the rules," right? So I don't really consider myself a postmodernist. I don't consider myself much of anything, but I do know that that's the tradition that excited me when I was starting to write.
Paul...
Is that anything like an answer to the
question?
It is.
Paul Cézanne, the painter, always felt that he had to, up until the end of his life, until he created the Bathers in, 1907, always felt like he had to create a big painting, both in terms of size, but in terms of a great piece of work. Do you think about that?
Well, see, it's different. A book is a different kind of object than a painting. A painting, however big it is taken in all at once. Size is an entirely different component of it. For a book, a big book means the reader is going to have to spend a long time reading it, which means your burden of proof goes up, right? Big books are more challenging. They're more intimidating. So, if you're talking about Infinite Jest, I have a problem with length, and it's one reason why I'm grateful to have found a really good editor. Infinite Jest did not start out to be this long. It started out to be a fractured multiple narrative with a number of main characters, and it became, perhaps I was just in denial that this was going to require great length. At a certain point, it became clear that it was going to be very long. Feminists are always saying this. So feminists are saying white males have, okay, I'm going to sit down and write this enormous book and impose my phallus on the consciousness of the world.
And you say?
If that was going on, it was going on at a level of awareness I do not want to have access to.
Do you still play tennis?
I do play tennis. I no longer play competitively.
You played as a junior. And you were competitive and good.
I was good. I was not even very good. I was between good and very good. I was good on a regional level. And one of the things about writing the piece about Michael Joyce, who was 100th in the world and junior champion, is I really had to realize that there were a lot of levels beyond the level that I was on. That essay for me, which I know you haven't asked me about and now I'm talking about, is ended up, it's very weird, and I'm surprised Esquire even bought it. It ended up being way more autobiographical than it did. It was supposed to start as a profile this time.
But it was about you.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of these I think end up being.
I think so too.
As a couple of reviewers have pointed out.
Therefore, back to David Lynch. How is that about you?
I'm trying to think of a way so that this will have anything to do with what we've talked about before. Imagine you're a hyper-educated avant-gardist in grad school learning to write.
Right.
Okay? Screen gets all fuzzy now as the viewer is invited to imagine this. Coming out of an avant-garde tradition, I get to this grad school, and the grad school turns out all the teachers are realists. They're not at all interested in postmodern avant-garde stuff. Now, there's an interesting delusion going on here. So they don't like my stuff. I believe that it's not because my stuff isn't good, but because they just don't happen to like this kind of aesthetic. In fact, known to them but unknown to me, the stuff was bad. It was indeed bad. So in the middle of all this, hating the teachers, but hating them for exactly the wrong reason, this was spring of 1986. I remember who I went to see the movie with. Blue Velvet comes out. Blue Velvet comes out. Blue Velvet is a type of surrealism. It may have debts. There's a debt to Hitchcock somewhere, but it is an entirely new and original kind of surrealism. It no more comes out of a previous tradition or the postmodern. It is completely David Lynch. And I don't know how well you or your viewers would remember the film, but there are some very odd. There's a moment when a guy named the Yellow Man is shot in an apartment, and then Jeffrey, the main character, runs to the apartment, and the guy's dead, but he's still standing there. There's no explanation. You know, he's just standing there, and it's almost classically French, Franco-philistically surreal, and yet it seems absolutely true and absolutely appropriate. And there was this, I know I'm taking a long time to answer your question, there was this way in which I all of a sudden realized that the point of being postmodern or being avant-garde or whatever wasn't to follow in a certain kind of tradition, that all that stuff is BS imposed by critics and camp followers afterwards, that what the really great artists do, and it sounds very trite to say it out loud, well, what the really great artists do is they're entirely themselves. They're entirely themselves. They've got their own vision, their own way of fracturing reality, and that if it's authentic and true, you will feel it in your nerve endings. And this is what Blue Velvet did for me. I'm not suggesting it would do it for any other viewer, but Lynch very much helped snap me out of a kind of adolescent delusion that I was in about what sort of avant-garde art could be. And it's very odd because film and books are very different media. But I remember going with 2 poets and 1 other student fiction writer to go see this, and then all of us going to the coffee shop afterwards and just, you know, slapping ourselves in the forehead. It was this truly epiphanic experience.